So I'm sure we'll get more folks as we go along, but this is an interactive workshop today, so I want to make sure that people have time to do those things. So we're going to get started, and we're going to start with introduction. So hello, thank you so much for attending this workshop. We're so excited you made it to this first session of the weekend of our 1619 Education Conference. I'm DJ, one of the senior program managers on Pulitzer Center's education team and the manager of our 1619 Project Education Network.
And I am Kendra Grissom, the intern for 1619 programming on the Pulitzer Center education team. This workshop is designed to help attendees understand the breadth and depth of materials within the 1619 project.
Awesome. I lost my notes really briefly.
Okay, so you got it?
Yeah, you go.
Today, for this workshop, we will be diving into project themes and elements, engaging with resources from the project, and sharing a bit about how these tools have been used for learning in and out of schools.
So some of our goals for today, hopefully you begin to cultivate a relationship with Pulitzer Center. I don't know if this is our first event that you've attended. Welcome, if that is the case. Some of you may be more familiar with us, but we hope that you feel connected to us and to the educators that we are in partnership with after this workshop and throughout this conference. We're obviously here to explore the breadth and depth of the 1619 project. We have heard so much about the project, but what truly is it? And what is inside of it? That is what we're here to cover today. And then hopefully, after that, you're then interested in knowing more about the programs and resources that we have available for educators who want to work with the 1619 project, want to work with other related reporting on underreported global issues, which is Pulitzer Center's main focus, and who are teaching hard histories and doing culturally responsive pedagogy work. Because that is some of what we do here.
Okay, so here is an overview of today's workshop. In our time together, we're going to spend the first 10 minutes doing a welcome and introductions. Then we will spend about 15 minutes providing an overview of the 1619 project. The majority of our time together today will be devoted to our adapted podcast listening activity. Following the activity, we will spend 10 minutes giving some highlights of the 1619 program, and we will end with questions and closing remarks. Okay, before we officially get started, just some housekeeping notes about our Zoom webinar. Your voice matters to us, and we want to hear from you. As DJ mentioned, this is an interactive workshop, so please feel free to use the Q&A feature at any point throughout the workshop. If you have a question that is specific to me or DJ, we ask that you indicate that in your question. You can share notes and responses with workshop facilitators, the two of us, in the chat for us to share out. So unfortunately, due to the size and scale of our event, attendees are not able to chat with each other, but we have other ways for each of you to engage. Lastly, if you plan to attend any other sessions today, which we hope you do, know that your registration link will be the same for the entire conference. The webinar will close after each event, but to rejoin, just click the same link when it's time for the next event you desire to attend.
Okay. Before we dive in, we want to do a quick introduction to who we are and kind of why you're here. And I'd love you to share with us from 1 to 4, how familiar are you with the Pulitzer Center? So 1, you're sort of just hearing about us for the first time. This is your first event with us. 2, maybe you've heard about the organization before, but you don't really know what we do. 3 is somewhat familiar, and then 4 is very familiar. I'm seeing lots of 1s and 2s. A 4 from Christine from Canada. Hi, Christine. Kim, and from our 2022 cohort, hello. So it looks like a few people have maybe used a resource or two, but many of you are new to us, or this might be your first time attending something. So thank you for being here. As I mentioned earlier, we're a journalism and education organization. We work to raise awareness of underreported global issues, including racial justice issues, through direct support for quality journalism and our program of education and outreach. So Kendra and I are both from the K-12 education team. We also have a campus and outreach team that works with higher ed partners and community programs. And then we have our editorial team that works with the journalists. We have teams all over the world doing this work in different regions. So definitely check out our website to learn more about the work that other teams are doing. Here are some of the topics that our journalists investigate with the Pulitzer Center grants. And something to highlight here is this children and youth piece, the criminal justice piece. Really a lot of this is folded into some of the work that we are doing with the 1619 project with teachers. Our team, the K-12 education team, this is our mission. So we work to provide programs and resources that cultivate a more curious, informed, empathetic, and engaged public by connecting teachers and students with underreported global news stories and the journalists who cover them. We do this work because we know that students say they feel more knowledgeable and more prepared to take action in their communities when they are aware of what's happening in the world around them, when they have access to news stories, but they also report significant obstacles to staying informed and to having that access. Children have reported that their news doesn't always cover issues that feel relevant to them. Sometimes it's complicated and hard to follow. Sometimes it's making them feel negative emotions. And so how do we keep them informed while being aware of all of these statistics? Part of our approach to this work, our programs and resources. So we have the journalism that we're publishing, articles, photos, videos that inform people about these issues in the world around us. We have lesson plans and student contests that your students can participate in. Virtual journalist visits. So a journalist that we are working with that we've given a grant to will visit your classroom, talk about their reporting with students, talk about the process of journalism. We have workshops for students and teachers, and we have our teacher fellowship programs, which our 1619 Education Network is one of those programs. We believe by doing all this work together, we are connecting students and teachers in order to strengthen critical thinking, media literacy, and communication and connection skills so that students can inform themselves, cultivate empathy, and take action. Which brings us to our 1619 work that we feel strongly aligns with this theory of change. We're going to come back to these programs and initiatives at the end of the workshop, but before we dive into them, we want to talk a bit about what the project is.
Okay. In August of 1619, a ship appeared on this horizon near Point Comfort, a coastal post in the English colony of Virginia. It carried more than 20 enslaved Africans who were sold to the colonists. No aspect of the country that would be formed here has been untouched by the years of slavery that followed. On the 400th anniversary of this fateful moment, it is finally time to tell our story truthfully. The 1619 Project calls us to recognize the foundational role of the institution of slavery in the United States and the often unacknowledged contributions of Black Americans in moving the country towards its stated ideals. Before we dive into project materials, we want to take some time to reflect on our own education about slavery in the United States and the lasting legacies of slavery around us today. So we ask that you take a moment to reflect on these questions, either in writing or in a format that works best for you. One, how did you first learn about the history of slavery in the United States? And what did you learn? And how was that information presented? Two, what do you see as a lasting legacy of slavery in the United States or in your local communities? And three, what do you know about the contributions of Black Americans to American society, and where does that information come from?
Awesome. So I saw some feedback about slide size. I just tried to increase it. Are folks seeing that reflected? Does it look a bit bigger? Okay, yes. Perfect. Good to know. And thank you. So you're going to take a moment to reflect on your own, and then we will share reflections to question 2 in a Menti. So again, we're talking about, you will have the opportunity to kind of see what other folks are thinking about using that tool. And I'll explain how to use it in a minute, but I'm gonna hold a minute or two for you to do your independent reflection before we go there. Some things we're seeing in here. Ashley was taught that it was that Black people were freed from by white people, right? So slavery was an institution that white people like freed Black folks from. Wamed is thinking about the series Roots and that being an introduction. Narratives post-Civil War. So we're talking about triumphs and what it looked like to possibly rebuild, but not necessarily the things before them. Hannah and Anne, you can reflect in the chat, you can reflect in writing. We'll hold another minute, whatever is sort of most useful for folks, and then we'll have a chance to share as a group. Candace saying she doesn't, or Candace doesn't recall learning about this at all in school. Occasionally songs, but nothing in detail. And then Kay Darby taught by their mom, who was an educator. Okay, so now moving pieces here. We're going to do our first group activity. So I'm dropping a link for everyone in the chat. If you're on your phone or other, I think it should work kind of regardless of the tech you're using and joining us on today. You can use the link, or you can go directly to menti.com and enter this code. It'll be the same code. We'll have 2 activities. It'll be the same code for both. We're just doing our first one today, though. So we're thinking about that second question. What is a legacy of slavery in your community? And you're able to share responses to that. It will generate a word cloud for us. I see some of you are already on it. I'm going to switch the screen that I'm presenting on so that you all can see this start to populate. Ooh. As we go. Well, did that work? Oh, I think that worked. It's moving very quickly, so. It's really interesting to see some of these start to get bigger as folks are adding. And there was a question, there are 318 of us in here right now. I saw a question about how many educators are here, possibly more joining, but so I'm gonna go back to our slides and give it a moment to keep growing before I move back, because 318 people is a lot of people. And also seeing some good questions in the Q&A, where we will have some, some time at the end of the session for those as well. All right, let me go back, see where we are. We're still growing, but things I'm noticing: poverty, housing, policing, and really lots of interesting things that are smaller as well. I'm going to ask if folks have already put like one answer in. You let other, oh, it lets us know how many folks have done it. That's cool. And this will be here for us to come back to also.
DJ, is it possible for you to make the screen bigger again?
To make this one bigger, I think this is the mentee. Okay. There you go. That should work better. Oh, it's okay. Let me see on my end if there is a setting that will allow everyone to be able to see as it. Why it wouldn't. Not show results here. Maybe I have to set. I'm not sure. I'm sorry, Natasha. I was trying to see if there was a setting that I could toggle that would allow folks to see this mentee even when we move on to the next piece, but it looks to me like everything should be there. Okay, let's try this link. I'm going to put in the chat for everyone. I think that one should allow you to see for yourself. And I'm going to now bring this back for all of us to look at together. Ooh. Okay, yay, good. I'm seeing from Morgan that that second link worked, and you are now able to see for yourself in your own screen some of the answers here. All right, we're going to go back to the slides and keep moving. And I think I'm passing back to Kendra now. Yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute. All right, we're gonna go into our 1619 deep dive to explore all of the components of the 1619 project.
Awesome. Oh, okay. All right. So the 1619 project is an expansive work. Some of you may or may not know about these different elements, but when the project originally published in 2019, it was published as a print magazine, so as a special issue of New York Times Magazine. And that issue had 18 essays by leading journalists and historians. So one thing people don't often realize is how many contributors there are to the project, right? There were 15 poems and short stories inspired by key moments in US history. And there were 2 photo essays. Published along with the print magazine was a print broadsheet that had a photo series analyzing how we teach the history of enslavement in the United States, and then also had photos of tools and archives from the Smithsonian Museum of African American History. In addition to that, there was a kids section of the New York Times Magazine published with a table that I'm going to click on so folks can see, with stats and data points that teachers could dive into with their students. So some of you, again, may have seen this before, for others it's new. They're things that can kind of grab students' attention, or maybe you invite them to pick one and to do additional research on. So that is what that piece looks like. There's a 5-episode podcast. There are 2 books. 1619, A New Origin Story is the anthology that has additional essays, poems, and short stories. And then Born on the Water is a picture book written in verse that also speaks to the history of enslavement in the United States, legacies of slavery, but then also the contributions of Black Americans. And the newest piece of the project is a 6-episode docuseries that was published on Hulu. And you see the photo for that here. So one resource I'm going to drop in the chat now is, because I'm still seeing for some folks that this is looking small. So hopefully it's helpful to have this resource. It does not have the docuseries reflected on here yet, but all of the other elements of the project are on this PDF with direct links to where you can find and access them. In addition to the project elements itself, the PDF that I just shared in the chat links to some of the curricular resources that Pulitzer Center and our education partners have put together for these tools. So you can bookmark that. And we're going to continue talking about these pieces. Okay. I've tried enlarging the slides again. Each essay in the project has a theme or a question that it's answering. And here's an example of some of the questions. And these are from the original magazine issue. So why doesn't the United States have universal health care? The answer begins with policies enacted after the Civil War. This is the argument that the writer is making, and then the essay focuses on that theme. What does a traffic jam in Atlanta have to do with segregation? Quite a lot, right? And so these are questions that grab students' attention. These are questions that are asking about things that are relevant to them, the world around them, the traffic jams that they're sitting in every day, or the music that they're listening to, and inviting us to look at the history and other things around it, to produce our own questions and to explore more ideas here. Oh, and thank you so much for this suggestion from Bellamy that says, if slides are showing small, you may need to shift the speaker view. So you can kind of change, hopefully in your Zoom, how big it is. But I have tried to make it bigger, and I will share resources so that folks can access on their own device as well. These are some of the themes that essays in the magazine issue considered. And we're going to invite you to think about which topics are you most interested in exploring, which topics would resonate with your students and why, and how would exploration of these themes support your classroom learning goals. I'll give folks a minute to read through the list. Awesome, and I can see lots of people here looking at the PDF now. This is another part of the reason that we kind of limited the chat, because now it's at the bottom for everyone and you can refer back to that. And we will have our docuseries guides uploaded to that. Once I update it, it should be to the same link. So if you bookmark it, you shouldn't have to, you know, like find it again with the updates. It'll just be the same place. Thank you for sharing this list in the chat for those that. Here is a list of some of the creative works from the original magazine issue. So what I'm inviting folks to notice here is just some of the brilliant creatives that were included, that are project contributors that folks may not realize are project contributors to 1619, creatives like Jacqueline Woodson, Clint Smith. And each of their poems, short stories, and creative works are linked to a specific moment in history. And Kendra will share an example. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So onto the anthology. Okay, so the 1619 Project Anthology, which was published in 2021, is an expansion of the initial New York Times Magazine issue, except the anthology includes an introduction, I believe it's authored by Nicole Hannah-Jones, the creator of the 1619 Project, that details reception to the project and its significance. The anthology also consists of revised and expanded versions of 10 essays from the original magazine issue and 8 brand new essays and footnotes, because we love citations and being able to track sources. It includes 35 creative works and photography curated by Kimberly Henderson of the Schomburg Center. In addition to the anthology, there is a picture book, a children's book, Born on the Water, that was co-authored by Nicole Hannah-Jones and Renee Watson and illustrated by Nicholas Smith, that has beautiful images that goes through the story of the 1619 Project in a way that is accessible to younger audiences.
Again, these are, this is pictures of the K-8 resource in the broadsheet. So things are included there. And these are the essays included in that print broadsheet, which is also available through the document that I shared. An example of the artifacts, right? So it'll have a picture that students can look at, and then some language curated by the museum curators explaining what this picture means, how it connects to what they may be talking about, and those legacies of slavery. And for those that are able, you know, to get to DC and be able to go to the museum, students can use this as a jumping off point and study, and then go and see these artifacts in person.
Then there is the 1619 Project podcast, which you can find online. It consists of 5 episodes that are all adaptations of some of the essays that are part of the 1619 Project Anthology. They explore the themes of music, the brutality of American capitalism, the idea of democracy, health disparities, and land ownership. And the most recent, sorry.
No, you go.
The most recent addition to the 1619 Project is the docu-series that is available via Hulu. It is a 6-episode series that features adaptations of the essays Democracy, Race, Music, Capitalism, Fear, and Justice. It is a great way to see Nicole Hannah-Jones in conversation with subject matter experts and hear the testimonies of the incredible people that she interviewed for each episode.
Great. Okay. And now we're going to dive into one of the podcast resources. So we're going to engage with some of one of the podcast episodes, right? So we don't have time to listen to the whole hour-long episode, but we'll listen to a few minutes together. And I want you, as you are listening, to be thinking both about the history that's being shared, what comes up for you when you're listening, what, if anything, is difficult to hear in the clip, and then why do you think it might be important for individuals to hear that history, even if it is difficult to listen to? This is one of the question prompts that we invite teachers to use when framing the podcast in their classroom, right? When they're going to have these conversations with students, of an acknowledging of the hard history of it, but then also empowering students to think about, okay, if I do believe that this is important for me to hear, and I'm aware that some of this is hard history, what can we do in our classroom? What can I do for myself to kind of prepare and process that? So after we listen to the episode, we're going to do an activity where folks are able to kind of rate on a scale, 1 to 5, how difficult was this for me to listen to? That will be different for every person, given our experiences and backgrounds. And then 1 to 5, how important do you think it is for individuals to hear this history? Hopefully we'll all be able to kind of see where the responses land and take in some of what other people are feeling around this before we go to the next step. So I'm going to go to the page for the podcast episode. So all of these episodes are here. You can listen to them in your podcast app or on this site. They also have transcripts for the episode, which is really nice and useful in class. And we have a listening guide for these episodes that kind of chunks the episode into sections and has questions for these. So the questions that we're using, as I've said, are actually adapted from those. I saw someone saying in the feed to us that they were looking for questions that they can use for adult conversation. I think a lot of what we have in our guide is also usable in those adult spaces, and we use among each other for learning in the network. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to play a few minutes of this podcast. We're going to listen together and try to think about what is coming up for us and why we think this might be important history for people to know.
Okay, Janine Interlandi, where do you want to start?
I think I want to pause there and see, can y'all hear? Because I saw someone say they don't hear the sound, but it maybe not. Okay, Bethany is saying yes. All right, let's keep it going.
We should start in the fall of 1866 with a woman named Rebecca Lee Crumpler. Rebecca Lee Crumpler is a young Black woman who was born free and raised in Pennsylvania by her aunt. Her aunt was a medicine woman. She used to go from home to home tending to the sick, and Rebecca liked to tag along and to help her. She liked it so much that she went on to become a nurse. And she was so good at being a nurse that she makes the really unusual decision to go on and become a doctor. So she eventually goes to the New England Female Medical College, which is a college that was specifically built to train women in medicine. And that's really extraordinary because around the time she graduates, there's about 54,000 doctors in the country and only 300 of them are women. And only one of those women is Black. And that woman is Rebecca Lee Crumpler. And so about a year after she finishes medical school, the Civil War comes to an end. And she makes another unusual decision, which is to completely uproot her life and to head down to the South.
Do you remember when the Civil War was being fought?
Well, I can't remember much about it, but I remember this much.
Because 4 million people have just been released from slavery into freedom.
And I thought old Master was dead, but what he had been off to the war and come back, and old Master didn't tell you, it was free.
He didn't tell you that?
No, he didn't tell you.
And Crumpler knows that it's going to be a huge challenge to help these people assimilate into society and to address their many basic needs, including healthcare.
Mama, what are they going? They said, well, all of you niggas is all free now. Yankees all going home.
I spent a lot of time reading the slave narratives, and we're not really taught that emancipation came and someone would walk on the plantation and say, you are free, but nothing came with that. These were people who just literally were told, you're free to go, but giving no resources to go with.
Even just with basic shelter,
We didn't have no property, we didn't have no home.
they didn't have places to go.
I was about 9, 10 years old. They didn't know. They right there. We didn't know where to go.
We had nowhere, nothing. We didn't have nothing on it, just like cattle. We were just turned out.
So they were forced to take up residence in abandoned prisons, former military barracks, empty churches, refugee camps.
I know, I remember one night I was out after I was free and I didn't have nowhere to go. I didn't have nowhere to sleep. I didn't know what to do.
They're crammed together in very close living quarters. They don't have the tools necessary to maintain good hygiene.
And get along the best you could.
And as a result of all of this, they're getting sick. But they can't tap into any healthcare system because at that time, there really isn't any organized healthcare system to speak of. Most medical care is provided at home by family members or by doctors who would actually visit the house. And the only hospitals that exist are much more like institutions for the very poor or for people who get sick and don't have any family members to take care of them. And those facilities were private and they were run by charitable groups. And when the newly emancipated turned to those facilities for help, they were turned away. They were told no. And they start dying in really high numbers. So much so that in some towns and cities, their bodies are littering the streets. This is a massive public health crisis. And so to deal with this crisis, the federal government creates what ends up being the nation's first federal healthcare program. It's called the Freedmen's Bureau Medical Division. And this is what Rebecca Crumpler is heading south to do. She's going to Virginia to treat the newly emancipated through this new medical program.
And what does she see when she gets there?
So when she gets to the South and she starts working, she sees that this new program is a complete mess. The hospitals she has gone to, just like all of the other hospitals in this program, are completely under-resourced. They don't have enough beds or sheets or linens. They don't have enough medicine. They don't have enough quarantine facilities, and they're in the middle of a smallpox outbreak. And there's this horrible shortage of doctors. There's only about 120 doctors employed by the entire program.
You're saying that the federal government at that time was only supplying 100 doctors to serve the entire emancipated population of 4 million people?
Yeah, so this is one of the crazy things about the Freedmen's Bureau Medical Division, which is it was founded in utter ambivalence. Officials wanted their communities clean enough to prevent diseases that might eventually spread into white communities, but they don't want to provide any free assistance because they're worried that it's going to create dependency among the Black American community. And so what they do is they open these hospitals and they staff them with a few doctors, but then they close them down at the first sign of progress, and they refuse to send resources that their own doctors, including Crumpler, are requesting. You know, they're saying, can we have additional staff to address the smallpox outbreak? No. Can we have more blankets and more bedding? No. Can we have an extra facility for quarantine so that the diseases don't spread? No. And so unsurprisingly, Black people continue to die at very, very high rates.
In that hospital in Virginia where Rebecca Crumpler is gone, what specifically is standing in the way of hospitals like that getting more support?
Well, one of the things was, as you have all of these people dying from preventable things, a theory emerges. And the theory goes that this high death rate is actually just nature taking its course. So Black people aren't dying for want of basic necessities. They're actually dying because they're biologically inferior to whites and ill-suited for freedom. The argument became that African Americans specifically were literally going extinct, and that to provide any type of funding or resources to fight that would be wasteful and foolish because you're just trying to prevent the inevitable. And this theory actually gains pretty wide traction. There's a congressman from Ohio who uses it to argue against the Freedmen's hospitals in the US House of Representatives. He takes to the House floor and he says, quote, "No charitable Black scheme can wash out the color of the Negro, can change his inferior nature, or save him from his inevitable fate."
Okay, so I'm going to pause there. I know that there's more to hear. All the podcast episodes are very, very good. But I want to give us some time to reflect on what we've heard so far. So now I shall try this again with the Mentee link. It mostly worked for us last time. I think you all should be able to Okay, this should be the right one that allows you to respond. Here is the participation link. There will be two. Participation, which I think is the same as before. And then here is the presentation, just in case it doesn't show you right away. After some folks respond, I'll share it up on the screen. But again, there's a scale. So you're 1 to 5. How difficult was it for you personally to listen to that history? And then 1 to 5, how important do you think it is for folks to hear that history? So that is what we are filling in. Let me get this. Oh, okay, yes, good question. So 5 would be high, like most important, and 1 would be least. Teacher error. I'm not sure that I can. Let's see if these responses are coming in. It says voting is closed. Well, that should not be the case. Let me enable it. Well, let's see if that. Okay, so maybe I need to do it that way. It's looking like responses are coming in. It's starting to work for folks. Thank you for your patience there. Or do I have, oh, I must have done this. Okay, hold on. Sorry, y'all. What? Sorry, I think I set this up wrong. I am fixing it live because I think I set it up wrong. Thank you for your patience with me here. How important is attention? All right, let me try now. Voting should be enabled again. I think it is better updated, and I will reshare these links for all of you. And if it's not working for you, you are also free to just kind of share responses in the chat that Kendra and I can read out. Joanne, I see all 5s for me. Michael says, the podcast is an important way to learn, the video series as well. We're made to feel distant from enslavement and its impact. is that we can't see or hear the actual stories from people who lived them. This is distinct from horrors of the 20th century that are documented so heavily and often seem closer and more real. And so as the history of the podcast is new, it was new to me as well. That's why I picked this clip and this episode. Martine learned some of this as a young girl. It's heartbreaking and confusing now, as it was then, even though it has been reinforced over and over in American and West Indian history. Okay, so it's showing me. Can I see it? I'm going to see if I can see our responses on the graph, which was the intention, but I don't think it's displaying it the way that I hoped it would. So I apologize for that piece. Oh, yes, and thank you. So our panel support will be sharing out some of your responses to us in the chat so everyone can read them that way. Okay. We'll keep moving so we have time for questions and everything. But thank you to panel support for getting those reflections in there. So I already mentioned the podcast guides that we have. Here's the link to them on the 1619 education site. In the network, something that I share with teams is how I constructed these guides, right? What are the things that I considered? Some of the stuff you're already sharing here in terms of how do you help students engage in this meaningful learning without having it be something that is perpetuating curriculum violence, that is too difficult to hear or listen to, and that you all can do in a responsive way. This is not an exhaustive list of components at all, but these are some of the things that we're asking ourselves in our network program. And so we're looking at the framing and content warnings, chunking, listening, doing it in parts, not trying to listen to the whole thing at once. Questions before and after that allow students to reflect independently before they have to share out loud. Highlighting moments of shared experiences, like something that one student might be feeling that another would miss, affirming reactions and things like that. So our teachers that are engaging with it and us as a team, we're really thinking about not just, oh, we want to use 1619, but how do we do this well?
That process of modeling how one might implement an element of the 1619 project with intention brings us back to our conversation around the supports the Pulitzer Center has for educators that want to engage with this work. So if you were to visit our website, 1619education.org, you will find a number of programs, initiatives, and resources that could be helpful for implementing 1619 resources in your classrooms. First, there is a resource guide collection for all parts of the 1619 project, including the podcast guide and the docu-series guide that allows you to break down each episode of the podcast and the docu-series. There are curricular materials written by and for educators at all age levels across disciplines. There are also fellowship programs available for educators who are interested. So there's the 1619 Education Network. Applications for the 2023 network drop next week if you are interested. And there's also the newly launched After School Partnership. We also have higher education initiatives. So we have a law school initiative, partnerships with schools of education, and partnerships with historically Black colleges and universities. And again, all of this can be found on our website, 1619education.org.
Okay, so I know that was a lot of information and quite a few tech problems, but I appreciate y'all bearing with us. We now have some time for follow-up questions here. I think our panel support has been curating them for us. I'm trying to find the Q&A, y'all. But you can also utilize the chat for any thoughts or feedback. If you learned something new about the project today, we would love to hear that if there is a piece that you didn't know. And I think because so many people are trying to access Spot's links, there might be something there, but we'll be tweeting about this, sharing these resources out throughout the conference. So definitely be following Pulitzer Center's socials, be following the hashtag teaching1619. If you missed something in the chat here, you will probably be able to see it there. And you can always email 1619@pulitzercenter.org with direct requests for like a resource that was mentioned today.
Okay. DJ, you want to tackle some of these questions?
I can find them. Okay.
You can read them. Our first question is from Dave. How can we counter so-called lost cause mythology? Many of the arguments propounded in 1866 are repeated today.
Yeah, I think that's a good question and one that a lot of teachers have, but I think, one of the reflections that someone shared here is even realizing that those recordings from formerly enslaved people exist, right? That we have these narratives, that we have this history. I think something that the 1619 docuseries does well, for those that are able to access and watch that on Hulu, is really center how we're not so far removed from the history at all. And we certainly have all these legacies all around us. And so I think that framing, if it's a lost cause, then what do we do with the issues that we have now? But looking back and seeing that there were choices, decisions, laws put in place to get us where we are today, I think is actually empowering for students, because then they get to think about the choices and decisions that they want to make, the things that they want to advocate for, and grow up to do and be. So, one thing I would say is just like really thinking through what approach to teaching is most empowering for students, how you talk about this, not just, oh, these problems are here and exist and there's nothing we can do about them, but here is what people have tried. Here is what's been put in place. Here is what's been blocked and why. That is much more useful, right? Just practically in terms of, oh, I now have an understanding of what steps I might take, whatever that means for me in my own learning and advocacy. And I see comments in here from a few other teachers that I'm going to ask Hannah or Mo to share out to everyone in terms of reframing.
There are a couple of questions about the source of the interviews with enslaved persons from the podcast. DJ, are you aware? My inclination is that they come from interviews conducted by the Work Progress Administration. I'm not sure how accessible they are online just yet, if they're available through the Library of Congress, but hopefully that's helpful. Gloria asked, is it a fallacy of history to list one cause for something? So prisons cannot be only the legacy of slavery. I'm not sure that it is.
I think that this is probably a good, question to consider with students. And I also think that understanding that any legacy is kind of multifaceted and has multiple components, right? So I don't think to say that, but also I'm not speaking for any of the writers of the of the project. That's something I am very, sort of cognizant of. We're the education partner for the project, but those brilliant writers and historians can speak for themselves, and their work speaks for themselves. But I think when we say something is a legacy of slavery in our community, that is so even slavery itself is multifaceted, right? And so when you break down, what does it mean for a person to be in bondage, for a person to have to labor, to not have access to any payment for that labor, to not be able to make decisions about their family, their body, their spirituality, and all of these things. Those are all different components of our existence. And so I think to say that naming prisons as a legacy of slavery is saying that there's only one cause. Those are actually not the same thing. Within that, right, you're talking about bondage in this country and what it means to kind of restrict people, fear of one another in this country, and what it means, like how we react to being afraid of what might happen or what could happen or who's around us, stereotypes, all of these things. That's multiple different pieces that are working together there. So hopefully that's helpful also for students as they're thinking about, you know, the project as this sort of like, there's only one perspective or one argument here. When you look at these historians citing multiple resources, building off their own history, you know, part of the issue is that these conversations generally happen in academia and they're not happening, you know, in our general spaces, in our families, in our homes. And so hopefully this is a tool that can help us start to do more of that work together. Okay, questions. Can individual teachers apply for the fellowship if they are not currently teaching in a school? And so you may want to look into the after school partnership program, or educators that are using the project out of school time. We have a panel on that tomorrow, but we have folks from community programs, after school clubs, you know, even like a library could maybe be a part of that program. So definitely look into that. Or if you have a specific context, you can always, like I said, reach out to 1619@pulitzercenter.org, and we can see what potential partnership looks like. I see Hannah's question about resources for navigating the climate backlash, parent questions and such. And so we do have a frequently asked questions section on our site with kind of how, you know, we respond to some of those questions. The thing that I love about the resources on our site that these teachers are making and that we've made is they're very digestible, they're standards aligned. Most teachers are able to sit down with a parent that has a concern in their classroom, right? And talk through how this connects to what they're doing in class in general, because it's also not just, you know, this is our 1619 unit, and then we're not talking about like equity at any other point in the year. We're not talking about our community at any point in the year. Hopefully we're doing this work in multiple ways with different tools. So that's one conversation I think that is productive for school communities to be having. But then also knowing what is in here and pulling out the specific tools, right? Because they're part, like in, you know, the docu-series, for example, in our viewing guide, we say, this is a section with a lot of, you know, footage of police brutality that like, I may not watch that with my third grade class, right? But there are other tools that I can use with that. So then also being able to say, this is what we're using, let's look at it. What is your concern about this specific piece and how it connects to our other things, and not feeling like you have to talk about everything at once and sort of deal with it in that way. But I think as a teacher, you have parent questions all the time about, you know, rigor in the work, about book choices and things. That is not to minimize the climate that teachers are in right now at all. But I do think that being able to have those conversations and being able to take parent questions at face value is an important step for sure. Okay, we're a little bit over. Try to see if there's like another quick one. Suzanne, we do not have any Spanish language units right now. We have a couple of units that were made in classrooms with English language learners, and a couple units that focus on like Latino students, Afro-Latino students, and those communities. But that is, you know, something that we've been asked for before, and is aspirational for us for sure. Okay. All right. Well, we will be here all weekend. The email box is, of course, open. We really thank you all for attending, and we hope that you will come back at 2:30 for our first panel with teachers in the program. So you'll get to hear some of the educators answer these questions that you're bringing in of like, how did you talk to the parents? What did this look like? How did you fit this into your curriculum map? How did you do this with preschoolers? All of those things. So yeah, we hope you take the break, enjoy the break, and come back for our first panel today, and that we just see you throughout the conference. Use the hashtag teaching1619 to continue connecting with one another, and use that 1619@pulitzercenter.org email to share more questions with us. Thank you all so much.